this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because, as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Welcome to the End Game, where we discuss race and sports, and we have a truly special guest from history today, Terry Henley, an Auburn running back on those great 1970, 71, 72 teams, who was the teammate of James Owens, the first Black player at Auburn. He signed in 1969 out of Fairfield High in Alabama. First, let me introduce my co-host, Herman Bowles, who is from Florence, Alabama, the first Black quarterback at his high school in Alabama, Coffee High. And then he went on to West Point, retired colonel, and as a top executive at JLL in Washington, D.C. How are you, Herman?
I'm doing great. And obviously, as a young man growing up in Florence, Terry was definitely a hero to all of us. It was either sort of Alabama or Auburn, and Terry was on the Auburn side. And as I started my football career, he was, as they say, the man.
Yeah,
Terry, it's a pleasure for me to
with Pat in the 1970 Heisman Trophy winner too.
You got it.
Yeah.
And to know that your roots, particularly with your wife Lisa, are in Florence, is doubly rewarding, and I'm looking forward to, because I'm certain through your wife, our degrees of separation is going to be one.
Okay. And Terry is from Oxford, and he's still working hard at his company there from the boardroom. How you doing, Terry? So, welcome to the show.
I'm doing great, guys. Thank you. This is an honor to be with you too. I know my wife will be excited that I tell her that I was on the Zoom call, with one of the fellow great athletes from Florence, Alabama. And I'm just tickled to have this talk with y'all about the racial development, in white schools, and what my friend James Owens meant to Auburn University and all the great athletes that came after him.
Great. Well, where I want to start is, if you were to ask most Alabama or college football fans, who was the first Black player in the state of Alabama? Well, they'd say, Bear Bryant. He signed Wilbur Jackson in 1970. And if they didn't say that, they'd say, maybe it's Sam Cunningham. But that's all wrong, right, Terry? Who was it? Tell us the story.
It's James Owens was the first player signed from Fairfield, Alabama in 1969.
At Auburn, 1 year ahead of Alabama, even though Alabama gets all the credit for leading college football integration. And as I often write in my book, college football integration was fait accompli by 1970, because so many schools like Auburn were ahead of Alabama. Comment about those teams back in that era, Herman. You know it well.
Well, when James and I, of course, signed, we were in the same signing class and all, and of course, I came from an all white school. We, of course, were the first all-white school to have to play an all-black school in the championship game in Calhoun County back then in 1969. And that was Cobb Avenue, one of the largest Black schools in the state of Alabama at that time. And it was a monumental, extraordinary crowd, I would say. There was not a seat in the house any place for that game. And of course, my side won 12-6. But nevertheless, what an honor it was to play in that first game.
Yeah. And Herman, you, of course, are well aware of the integration began in the late 60s, not in 1970.
That was an interesting time. However, as a young kid, and I'm certain Terry had the same experience, perhaps, you just wanted to compete, right? And obviously the civil rights movement was kind of at its peak there in 68, 69. But however, 70 and desegregation started and the schools were integrated. And, there certainly were some challenges. However, I think, and Terry, I don't know if you agree with this, but the sports and the process of sportsmanship and competition actually assisted in the integration process, in my opinion.
Herman, I totally agree with you. I'll go back, and I just got a cold chill that run down my back when I was thinking about this. In this ball game that I played against Cobb Avenue, the first 2 times they punt the ball, I take it back to the house on them to put 12 on them real quick. We didn't have a good field goal extra point kicker at that time, but nevertheless, I didn't score any more the rest of the game, but I ran for a lot of yards. When the game was over, their players and their fans were lined up along the fence to shake my hand. And you don't think that that's a moment I'll never forget. Never forget. And man, what athletes they were. I remember Cecil Bull King was a running back on that football team, and they just had some great athletes that played. And it was a learning process for all of us in 1969 and 68 and on going forward. And it was a learning process when I got to Auburn too with James.
Yeah, and it's still a learning process. I want to mention that I tell the James Owens story in chapter 23 of my book, The Right Thing to Do, the true pioneers of college football integration in the 1960s. And Hal Raines, who's from Alabama educated, born, raised, a former New York Times executive editor, he's written a new book called Silent Cavalry: How the Union Soldiers from Alabama helped Sherman burn in Atlanta and got written out of history. And it's about how the Southern historians made concerted efforts to keep this story out of history, that a lot of people in Alabama were against secession. They didn't have slaves, and they actually fought for the Union. And it makes me think that maybe for the next edition of my book, I should rewrite the subhead, How the True Pioneers of College Football in Integration in the 1960s Were Written Out of History. Talk about your friendship with James Owens and how he got to know the team and how you guys all blended and just kind of moved history forward with college football integration, all the things happening at Auburn that were happening ahead of Alabama.
Oh, I'd love to. Listen, I remember going to the state playoffs and sitting in the stands watching Fairfield High School and Sachs High School play. And I was sitting in the stands and watching them warm up. And here's this intimidating factor out on this field where number 44, he wore a full cage mask. He had these arm pads on that started his wrist and went up his elbow to his elbows. He looked like a down lineman. And here this monstrosity of a human being is on the field. He's out there catching punts. He's warming up, catching punts. And I was sitting there and I was talking to somebody there in the stands. I said, who in the world is that? And they said, that's James Owens, said he's going to Auburn. And I almost called Auburn the next day and said, I don't think I'm going to come if James is coming. Because, I mean, he was such a an athlete. I mean, he was the largest player on the team on the football field that day. Now
Yeah.
they were not fortunate enough to win. They were defeated in that game, but that was the first time I ever laid eyes on James Owens. So a few weeks later, of course, we come to Auburn to start summer practice, etc. And we're all in the lobby, and that's where we all met James. And listen, it was a growing process and a learning process for all of us. It really was. I mean, first of all, some of the parents were concerned of who's going to room with James. Well, of course, Auburn had a African-American basketball player by the name of Henry Harris, who had signed a year before James did with the basketball team. And so James was roomed with Henry. And but then still, James didn't have a car, and he, some of the guys, some of them he rode with some of them, and some of them he didn't, and it was just a learning process. But the thing about it, it was a love that was developed for James Owens, because listen, he taught us the way. He showed us the light. He showed us how he was. He showed us what a good Christian man he was. He showed us what a great family he had, and the courage that he had is unbelievable. He had more courage in his thumb than I did in my whole body. I mean, this man was so. I mean, people called him names. They never called him any names when one of us was around James, because we would have stomped their hind end, But James never let out at him or anything like that. He had to go, just where to get his hair cut. He had to go find a place to get his hair cut, because none of the barbershops in Auburn could cut his hair. So just little things like that you look back on and say, how courageous this man was to go through all of that and be the guy who he was, and never lash out at somebody. Besides the athlete he was, I can sit here all day and talk about, and I will as we get on down the line here in ball games, etc., about what he did.
How did Coach Jordan handle the integration of James into?
Herman, that's a good point. That's a good point. You know how he handled it? He was our teammate. That's how we treated it. You know what I mean? When we went someplace, if somebody said something, one of us would speak up and say, he's our teammate. He's our teammate. That's how we all treated James. Never did anyone say anything to James, bad. I mean, he was a wonderful person, and we all loved him. But let me tell you something, if anybody did say anything to him, it would be hell to pay. I'll tell you that,
Yeah, and this is the other story I like to tell. People who have spread the 1970 USC Alabama myth like to claim that Bear Bryant wasn't allowed to recruit black players because of George Wallace, and he had to invite USC to Birmingham and lose the game so that George Wallace and Alabama fans would relax. And the USC people have promoted this myth too, because they were slow to abandon their unwritten quotas, limiting black athletes to about a half dozen or so. But what really happened, and both of you guys know this, is in the late 60s, the Alabama schools desegregated, and that included both the Alabama Athletic Association for white schools and black schools. They merged. And you guys, as you mentioned earlier, Terry, you played them in the playoffs. So one day, Jim Hillier in 1968, Auburn assistant coach, goes to a Fairfield game, and he's actually there to see somebody else, but he sees James Owens, and he goes back and he tells Coach Shug Jordan that we ought to recruit him. Now, the reason this is important is because Bear Bryant didn't go to black high schools. That's why he only went to white high schools. That's why he didn't recruit any black players. He didn't know anything about them. And even when the desegregation process started, he still wasn't going there. Wilbur Jackson was his first black player a year later. Wilbur, as a junior in 1968, was attending a black school. As a senior in 1969 in Ozark, Alabama, he was attending D.A. Smith. As a senior, he attended Carroll, and that's when Alabama discovered him. Herman, comment on that about how, because you were making your way through middle school and into high school, about how you became more aware of black athletes both in high school and college. There was a quarterback that was special to you.
Yeah, well, it was, I can think back and I know that Joe Hollis, who I know Terry knows very well. I assume you know Joe, Terry.
Yes.
Joe was graduated from Coffee High School in 1964 and recruited, played football and baseball at Auburn. And he was the freshman coach at Coffee High School under Buddy Moore, who was our head coach. And I'll just never forget. And, 69, 70 going out for practice. So let me go back a little. When I went out for Pee Wee football, I could always throw the ball, and I'll never forget the coach, and I have no idea what his name is or where he is now. And I went back, said, I want to play quarterback. And he said, no, you get over there. You're going to play guard. And I threw the ball better than anybody on this little Pee Wee team ever could. However, I think that was part of the prejudice association that, a black kid wasn't smart enough to play quarterback. And through the Pee Wee football, 2 years I played it, I was on the line. Everybody was skinny and small, so that didn't matter. And then when it came time, at Appleby, I played basketball. And then when it came time to go to Coffee, I had a choice between Coffee and Bradshaw, the other school in town, and I chose Coffee. And obviously over the summer, football practice starts. And Joe Hollis was the head freshman coach. And I'll never forget the other kid who went out for quarterback that was a good athlete. His name was Mark Thompson. He got very famous. He had a radio show, went out to LA and became a radio personality. And I got to tell you, I probably never said this publicly before, I didn't even think I had a chance. Okay. And then when the starting depth chart was put out before the first game, lo and behold, Bulls was the starting quarterback. And that was, again, this would have been in 1969, 70 school year. And I obviously the height of it. And we had a very similar situation in that Burrell Slater High School, which was the all black school in Florence, was closed the year before. So the desegregation was going and the schools were put together, and being at least selected as the starting quarterback, I'm going to tell you, I think as a freshman in high school, contributed significantly to my professional career because I ended up being a class favorite. I was a good student, so I was on honor society. And Terry, for your benefit, I ended up my senior year as president of student council, the starting quarterback, record holder in high jump, played basketball, and for freshman and sophomore year also played baseball. Boys State had, and my claim to fame is I got a mimeograph letter from Alabama. Certainly, that's the best Bear could do for me. But with everything I had to offer the service academies, I was a perfect candidate for them, and they recruited me to play. And one of my, you may know, a guy named by the name of John Smith, who was my left tackle. He's the guy that protected me. He went on to Auburn, and he had a pretty good career there at tackle.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And the point I want to make clear for any Bear Bryant apologists or USC myth makers is there was no genius plan by Bear Bryant. That was the headline in a Forbes magazine story recently. It was as simple as Jim Hillier, an Auburn assistant coach, spotting James Owens and telling Shug Jordan, let's recruit him. That's how simple desegregation was. Anyways, let's move on. Terry, Tom Gossam, another one of the early Black players at Auburn, who went on to Hollywood as an actor and producer. You guys all got together and and he directed and produced a very, very interesting documentary called Quiet Courage. Tell us about that.
Well, I think, and of course, Tom was 2 years younger than me. He was a walk-on player from John Carroll High School, extremely bright young man, great athlete, etc. And he walked on as a wide receiver and, of course, made the football team. He and James were very good, close. Thomas, after all was said and done, after our playing careers and all were over, and several years later, Tom wanted to do a documentary of some nature called Quiet Courage for James. He interviewed a lot of people, did a lot of work on this, and it turned out great. I mean, listen, if I go back here in my office and I put this CD on the computer and play it, I can't tell you that I don't get tears in my eyes watching it, because I do. It's a very moving movie. Okay. I was honored to be in it. James and I were such great friends. I mean, I gotta step back here just a little bit. And, you know, that James and I played, you know, he was the fullback and I was running back. But before that, the coaches couldn't find where to play James. He was so talented. When I was a freshman on the freshman team, he played wide receiver. When we got there our sophomore year, he played defensive cornerback. And then I remember all the linebackers got hurt our sophomore year when we played Alabama. We didn't have a linebacker. We moved a starting tight end who was the captain of the team over to linebacker because he played linebacker in high school. And they moved James from defensive cornerback to linebacker. Well, the first play of the game, the next thing you know, John Hannah's done pushed James Owens all the way back down the field. You know, I mean, John just ate his lunch because James wasn't used to playing that position. I mean, he was talented enough to do a lot. But so anyway, I think James really, the coaches couldn't figure out what to do with James. I mean, he was so talented. He goes to Florida in 70 and returns that punt 80 yards, 86 yards down there, you know, on them, and just, you know, made people look like fools trying to tackle him, you know. So he had a burst of energy, and he was so big and these long legs, you know, he was 6'3" and a half, 220 pounds and could fly. And then in 72, after Pat Sullivan and I all played in the backfield together, we went to a running offense and they put James at fullback and me at tailback. And I guess the rest is history, I guess. I didn't go anywhere unless I was following James, okay? I mean, because he didn't do anything but make a path. And he made a wide one as I followed him. One of the most talented, so strong. He was just these big old veins in his arms and legs. And it was incredible to see this athlete, what he was. I mean, and never complain.
Yeah, and I've seen that documentary. You're right. It's very well done. Not enough people have seen it because Bear Bryant sucks the air out of the room. And you were telling me about how when Bruce Feldman, who was then with ESPN, came to Auburn for some stories, you tried to convince him that this would be a great 30 for 30 story, but nothing happened. Tell us about that, Jerry.
Well, Bruce Feldman came to do a story on the tumors, trees, and things because of the toilet tissue throwing, and I was a big cause of that and all. And then just to do a story of Pat Sullivan and the trees and all that stuff too. And I pleaded with Bruce. I called Bruce Feldman 2 or 3 times. I sent him 2 or 3 of the tapes to him pleading with him that, look, this is a 30 for 30 show. If you ever gonna do one, this is one to be done.
I'm convinced a lot of these national media members have been selling the Bear Bryant myth for so long, they're uncomfortable going back and touching the history, kind of like what Hal Raines is writing about with the Alabama Union soldiers marching with Sherman into Atlanta. And the other point I want to make about the difference between Auburn and Alabama is in that documentary, your athletic director, David Housel, says, looking back, Auburn should have done more to support James Owens, and they shouldn't have brought him in as a single black player to face all this on his own. When you compare that to Alabama, where all they do is celebrate Bear Bryant for this myth of desegregating the South in the 1970s, when it was already fait accompli. Talk about that attitude at Auburn and the creation of the James Owens Courage Award in 2012.
Well, I went to David Housel, the athletic director at that time, and I told him, I said, look, we need an award for James. We need an award for James Owens. James Owens needs to be recognized more than he is. And I said, we need to call it the Courage Award. And of course, later when Thomas Gossen did his movie, he named it Quiet Courage, listen, David Housel did not flinch one iota. He said, I totally agree with you, Terry. And there is an award given out each and every year as a Courage Award honoring James Owens. And it's given to a player who has to overcome so much. We had one that was a quarterback on the 72 team, Randy Walls. He has cancer, and he receives this award, and he's whooped cancer. It just shows that the people they have selected for this has a courage that won't quit, just like James did.
And your thoughts on Auburn having a special award like that for a black man?
Diversity and representation is very important. Branding is very important. People see and believe what they see. So having a role model and honoring an individual who is a trailblazer, and again, in many ways, Terry, you were a trailblazer, Tom, you're a trailblazer, I was a trailblazer. When you're going through those, people often ask me about, whether it's my athletic career, my business career, whatever. When you're going through those moments, you don't realize how eventually powerful they're going to be, right? You get up in the morning, you put your pants on, you put your shoes on, and you just go and do it. However, in retrospect, as I look back, even in business, I did not have a lot of role models, that I could look up to and say, hey, I want to do what they're doing. Okay, there were one or two. And I can tell you the comfort as one person, when you see someone that looks like you accomplish something, it's a very inspiring feeling, and it gives you the hope, the determination, and the drive to succeed and try to do it. So I think it was a magnanimous choice, and I hope that it has served as a inspiration, not only for Black athletes to see that they can be recognized for things that they do on and off the field, but for all athletes to understand what courage and drive is about.
Yeah, and I probably should have said this earlier. James Owens, he had a lot of heart problems, and he died in 2016 at age 64. And Terry, you were by his side all the way through and spoke at his funeral. But you have a hospital room story to tell us with James.
Oh, Tom, listen, I used to play with James all the time. I mean, any award banquet that we had, where I was honored or something, my first person to make the call, and first person I would call to invite to make sure he's going to be there with James Owens. And when James got sick, I did everything I could to be there with James, to talk to him, to, to encourage him. We're going to get better, all of these things. And I got a call from his wife telling me that he was in the hospital and telling me that he was very sick. And I drive down to Opelika. I go in the hospital. I go up to his room. And when I walk in the room, he's laying on his side facing the door that I came in. He's asleep. He's asleep. His wife is on the other side of the bed sitting in a chair. I walk around the bed. I hug his wife, Gloria, and we could both get a little tear in our eyes. And I turn around there, and I'm looking at James laying there, and he rolls over and sees me standing there. And I said, when you saw me, you thought you died and gone to heaven, didn't you? He said, no, when I saw you, I thought I was in some other place.
He was thinking back to those two-a-days. Remember those?
Yeah. He has such one-liners. He was, Herman, it's hard for me to explain to you the friendship that he and I had. I mean, it was, and not just me, he had several friends, but he and I cared for him. I mean, we were both in the World Football League, and James got injured and couldn't, he'd already been to New Orleans and he'd hurt his knee, and then hurt it again in the World Football League. And we were down in Marion, Alabama practicing, and he didn't have a car. And I drove him up to the bus station to put him on the bus to come to Birmingham. And we were hugging each other standing in Marion, Alabama, there on the sidewalk before he got on that bus, knowing that was the last of our teammate. What a great guy. What a wonderful person. I won't ever forget James Owens.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to describe one more scene from that documentary. Then I want Terry and Herman to give us our final comments. And as usual, Herman can always articulate these issues so much better than me. That's why I enjoy having you with me so much, Herman, and appreciate it. In that documentary, one of your teammates, Mac Lorendo, says that he turned to James when he was getting the first James Owens of Courage Award in 2012. And of course, nowadays, there's a lot of Black players at Auburn and all throughout college football. And Mac asked James if today's players understood what he endured. And that's the point I always try to make, is people don't understand today that segregation is recent history, not ancient history. Talk about that day and the continuing need to educate all Americans. Terry first.
Well, yeah. Well, Tommy, when you walk in the dining hall, who you going to sit with? Who you going to sit with? Lots of times you go through to the TV room, and James is sitting in the TV room by himself because other white guys have gone out to a party someplace. Okay. So all of this had to be a learning process that we learned to take James with us, that he became part of us. And I think we all accomplished that. I don't think you will ever find a football player from when James was signed to when we left in '72 that didn't like James Owens and did not respect James Owens and did not, and they respected him for the courage he had to stick with it and teach us all how we should act. Okay, in this training period, if you will, to learn how to love each other. And it also taught you that in athletics, you don't see color. Color doesn't exist in athletes. We're all one team. We're all in the huddle together. We're all playing together. A team does not look at color.
Herman, bring us home.
Okay, well, look, this is you hate to see the premature death of any person. and you certainly hate to see it with James and the impact that he had. And I guess from my reading, he became a minister. So I assume he continued to motivate, inspire, and challenge people to be their best. And Terry, I think you summed it up in one sense, is that athletics is a true meritocracy for teams that want to win, meaning that the person with the best total combination of skill, attitude, leadership is going to be given the opportunity to present and portray their skills. And people like James Owens, who were certainly trailblazers for many of us who followed, and he probably impacted people. And again, one of the reasons I enjoy so much being with Tom doing this series is I learned so much of things that I've taken for granted. And I hope young people out there that are listening to this now realize that you stand on the shoulder of giants. And certainly James Owens was one of those giants. And Terry, for me personally, again, knowing who you were as a high school player, and, you know, at the time, my only thought was, you know, I'm going to play sports, and, you know, we all think we're going to be a professional athlete when we grow up. And you were one of the people that certainly brought that home for me and my friends that we were playing there in Florence. However, we also understood that it was important to plan for the day that we couldn't play football. So I thank you, and it was a pleasure to meet you.
Okay, again, thanks for watching. The James Owens story is chapter 23 in my book, The Right Thing to Do. And as we sign off here, there'll be information on how to purchase my book. Spread this story to everybody you know. It's important that we understand where we are today and as a country and where we're going in the future. Thanks for watching.